Hey everyone, Cleo here, and today I'm giving you some queer book recommendations. Now, I am gonna keep this list super short. It's really gonna be books, queer books that I absolutely loved. And sadly, I haven't read enough queer books to give you a super long list, so it's definitely something that needs fixing within the future. There are quite a lot of books that I'm not mentioning in here that I gave like 4 stars, for example, and that I did definitely like a whole lot. But here I just wanted to stick to the ones that, you know, are standouts in my opinion, the ones that I enjoyed the most. And then at the end of the video, I'm gonna quickly run through a few books that I have on my radar. It is a very gloomy day today in Belgium. I am also filming from the location in which I have the least light on me. So is this a smart idea? Probably not, but we're gonna stick through with it. So it is June, it is Pride Month, and because I'm reading the final books on my physical TBR, I sadly have no queer books left to read. And so to compensate for that lack of queer content that I will be reading, I am putting some queer content out there. So first off, the first book that I want to talk about here is going to be a contemporary, and that is Loveless by Alice Oseman. So I have yet to read Heartstopper, which is a graphic novel series also by Alice Oseman, which currently has just been made into a TV show on Netflix, and which is really doing the round and has all of the hype at the moment. It has definitely had the hype within the bookish community over the past few years, and it's definitely one that I want to pick up after I finish my physical TBR. But Loveless is one that I did pick up, I think last year, the year before that maybe, and I absolutely love this one. This one is very near and dear to me because this one has asexuality representation, and around the time in which I was reading this, a little bit before already, finally started to identify as asexual. You know, it's a sexuality that I hadn't heard about for a very long time. You know, when I grew up in high school, we learned about like gay and lesbian, and that was about it. So finding out about more of these sexualities also made me understand my own sexuality a little bit better. And reading Loveless was really like, okay, finding myself, you know, finding a character who thought along the lines that I think about when it comes to sexual attraction in particular. So Loveless is this story about a girl who is just starting university. So university is a sort of time for experimentation, figuring out who you are. But, you know, part of what she also expects to experience in university is going to parties, finding cute boys there, and having her first sort of sexual encounter. However, she finds herself acting very differently from the people around her and having a very different reaction to sexual encounters or to people making advances to her, until the day in which she finds out about asexuality and something kind of clicks. The book is definitely about way more than that as well. It's very much about the sort of like changes one goes through during your university days, these sort of like ways in which you start to understand more about your personality. And it's also, you know, about finding your people, about finding your friend group, as well as kind of stepping into your own and, you know, becoming a little bit more assertive, stepping out of the shadows a little bit more. I really enjoyed this one. I remember not being fully satisfied with the ending, but because of the way in which the representation was so important to me and was something that I hadn't read it up until that point, and how up until that point I had thoroughly enjoyed like 99% of this book or so. 99% of this book is 5-star material for me. I am willing to overlook the fact that I wasn't fully satisfied with the ending. The main reason for that is that it was maybe a little bit too sappy or well-rounded for me, and I like a little bit more of an open ending. Let's do the other sort of like general fiction type of book. So this one is historical, I guess we can call it, and this is Tinman by Sarah Winman. I do not own a physical copy of this book. This one will give us bisexual representation. So in this one we are looking at this guy who basically looks back on his life and on the big relationships that have marked him. And so basically we'll be zooming in on both his relationship with his wife and then on his attraction to a guy as well. And this one to some extent becomes kind of a love triangle. In any case, the relationship between the wife and this male suitor also is a very close, tight-knit friendship bond at certain points within the book. And I very much like how this book puts as much importance on the, you know, straight passing relationship that he has with his wife as it does on the relationship and the attraction that he feels for this guy. You know, in no way does it try to push the idea that his wife is just a shield that he's putting out there for the world to, you know, hide his true identity. He very much has genuine affection, genuine love for her. So I very much love how it validated both of these relationships and showed both of these relationships to be equally important. Next, I'm going to move over to 2 fantasy books that I highly recommend. First up is The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyon's first book in A Chorus of Dragons. I talk about this series all the time. I won't give too much of a premise because I do it all the time. So this is an epic high fantasy series. One of the main sort of like striking elements of this story is its structure. It's told on multiple layers, and we very much have a document within a document. So basically the entire book is a document, a report that is being created, that is being drafted to somebody within this world, and the report will consist of a sort of like summary of events leading up to a certain point within the story. Throughout the story there will also be footnotes that are adding extra information to what is presented within the report itself. This one very much is super queer. So our protagonist, first of all, is bisexual. He is somewhat in denial of his attraction to men at the beginning of this series. He kind of indicates that he has been willing to, you know, experiment in that direction, but that it didn't really work out. However, the dynamic with another male character within this first book already kind of indicates to us that probably there is some attraction to men there that he just isn't really aware of or isn't really willing to accept for himself, maybe. But our protagonist is far from being the only queer character within the series. Basically, by the end of it, it seems like almost everybody in this world actually was queer in one way or another. You know, you have very different sexualities being represented within this series. You know, you have people who are bisexual, you have people who are lesbian, gay, there's polyamory rep within this one, there's asexuality representation within this one, for example. There are certain concepts that have to do with gender as well, with the way in which one identifies their gender. So there's a whole lot of queer representation within this one. But so if you are in need of queer fantasy, because aren't we all, then this one is definitely a good one for you to explore. The second fantasy book that I want to recommend here is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This gives me an opportunity to kind of showcase this new French edition that I just got at a signing in Paris. So it's got the gorgeous sort of like sprayed edges, and the end pages, first of all, are gorgeous, but also underneath this dust jacket, this is just such a beauty. So She Who Became the Sun is a Chinese historical fantasy novel. But so She Who Became the Sun is the first book in what is intended to be a duology. It is very light on the magic, at least in the first book. So it could also work very well for readers who don't typically enjoy fantasy novels, for example. Within this one, we kind of have a gender-bent retelling. The events retold within this book are linked to the foundation of the Ming Dynasty. So around the 14th century, I believe, in China. At that point in time, China was under Mongolian rule. Mongol rule, I'm never sure what the adjective is in English base, but so large-scale historical plot. The Mongolians are in power at the beginning of this story, and we are seeing the original Chinese population kind of rebel against this rule. And at the center of all of this is going to be our protagonist, Ju. We never find out her name, because Ju is the family name, basically. And so she grows up in poverty. Her father takes her and her brother to see a fortune teller, and her brother is foretold that he will have a glorious life. You know, he will go down in history, he will be famous. And for her, the fortune foretold is nothing. There is nothing in her future. And very shortly after that, her father and her brother are killed in a bandit raid, and she takes over the identity of her brother in order for her to be able to survive and to claim his destiny. What's very interesting about this gender-bent novel is that it just so perfectly suits itself for the purpose of this novel. Gender-bent novels have typically been used to take a male character, make them female, show how women are just as powerful as men, how women can do just as much as men can do if they are allowed the same opportunities. And while I'm all in favor of those types of storylines, we do typically see them a lot, and that's the way in which gender-bent novels typically pan out. This one, however, will take that sort of like concept and will do something new with it, because throughout this book, Zhu Chongba will start to think differently about the concept of gender because of living that sort of like double identity. Having been born female, identifying as a girl, taking on the identity of a boy and pretending to be a boy for years on end, she develops a new relationship to gender. She doesn't consider herself to be a girl pretending to be a boy. She doesn't consider herself to be a girl or a boy. She kind of sees herself as being something that does not fit that binary. And I absolutely love this use of the gender bend trope in order to dismantle the gender binary. Aside from that, I really enjoyed it a whole lot. I mean, I studied Chinese for 1 year at university, and there was just so much cultural aspects about China that I recognized and loved within this story. It is wartime setting fantasy, which isn't for everybody, and there's definitely quite a lot of battle sequences within this one, which might not be of an interest to everybody. Aside from looking at gender and these sort of like restrictions of the gender binary through the character of our protagonist Zhu Chongba, there is actually a second character to which we will be discussing gender and the restrictions that thinking in terms of male, female, woman, man puts on characters, because we have a male character who is a eunuch, and so his relationship to his masculinity or to his gender identity is also fraught or is also complicated because of that reality, and also in particular the way that people view him and the way that he kind of is seen as being lesser than other men because of what has been done to him. And so I think both of these characters represents interesting discussions about gender and the way that we perceive gender, the way that we express gender. And so I absolutely loved how this fantasy novel tackled these thematics. But so yeah, absolutely love this one. One of my favorite books of last year, and I'm so looking forward to the next one. I am kind of sad that it's just a duology, but just because I loved it so much. But I am in favor of the fact of having duologies or maybe even standalones from time to time and not having every single fantasy series be a trilogy. It's just that I love this one so much that I wouldn't mind getting a whole lot more within this series than just two, but hopefully they will have other books lined up after that. And then the final book that I'm gonna absolutely recommend is a sci-fi novel, and that is The Membranes by Chi Ta-wei. It is kind of a cult classic. It is a translated novel from Taiwanese, and I cannot specifically speak to the queer representation within this one. I am not in favor of considering queer representation as a plot point, and I will absolutely from the beginning tell you there is queer rep in there, but I cannot fully speak to what type of representation is within that one. But so, as I indicated, it's a sci-fi novel. The story takes place around the year 2100. Due to climate change, the world population has had to go and live under the water. They've had to rebuild society over there. And we are following this woman who owns a sort of like beauty saloon, and she has become estranged from her mother. However, due to a letter I think her mother sent her, she is reminiscing about their relationship and about a time in her life when she was a young girl in which she had to spend a lot of time in hospital, and the close-knit relationship that she developed with the one person that she was allowed to see during that period in time. Now, that's more or less all I'm going to say about it. There is queer representation present from the beginning, but there are also things that fall into place later on within the novel that kind of give a new perspective on what you've read so far. I absolutely love this novel for many different reasons, one of which is its play on its title, The Membranes. So our protagonist, as I said, works in a beauty saloon, and she basically applies this sort of ointment on people, which kind of then acts as a sort of second skin, a membrane over their skin. Then a lot of times she will talk about how the ocean is kind of sort of like membrane over their world, and there's a lot of play on the word membranes. There are other thematics or other motifs running through the story, such as a canary that I have kind of forgotten a few things about, but there were just so many things that were thought-provoking in this novel, or so many things that I just found really cleverly done and very interesting as I went through this novel, that it was an absolute success for me, and I absolutely was blown away by the time that this novel was over. It's also a queer novel from a different culture, which also is always interesting to try out. But so yeah, that was the final book that I wanted to talk to you guys about. Definitely let me know if you have some other recommendations for me. I do definitely, as I said in the beginning, have some books that are on my radar. For example, in terms of fantasy, I want to complete the Sapphic Trifecta by reading The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. Another one that I think has queer representation is The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. Not entirely sure about that now, whether my memory isn't like misdirecting me there. Another queer, I don't know fully sure whether it's fantasy, I kind of think it's more like historical fiction, is The Siren Queen by Niveau, but it could be fantasy, it could be, it's unsure to me. That cover doesn't shout fantasy, but it could be. Something else that I want to read is Plain Bad Heroines, which also has queer representation within it. So a new one, Yerba Buena, is also one that I've kind of got on my radar. I've forgotten the synopsis for that one because I have had it on my radar for months on end, and so I should definitely look back into it. There's also Detransition Baby. It's been a while since it came out, and so I kind of lost some of the buzz for it, but it's definitely still one that I want to check out at some point. In terms of non-fiction, I'm interested in reading Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin is another one that I'm interested in reading. And then I'm going to kind of end my want to read overview. It's definitely not all I want to read, but these are kind of the top, I guess, at this point in time, or the ones that I can think of at this point in time, by mentioning the sequel to The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I did not mention this as a recommendation. It definitely is also a recommendation. I still gave it like 4 stars, though emotional connection wise it might be more like a 3.5, because this was somewhat of a disappointing read for me, but the things that I liked about this, which made me give it a 4-star rating in the end, are the things that I'm hoping will pan out more in its sequel. And so I'm hoping that the sequel can fulfill the need I had in that first book, can kind of fulfill my expectations for that first book and become a new recommendation in that sense. So The Oleander Sword is a sequel to this one. It's coming out, I think, this month, so that's also one that I do have my eye on. But so yeah, definitely let me know if you have any queer recommendations you want to add to my list. I would say I'm always looking for recommendations, but that's not true. I have a want to read list on Goodreads that's like almost 500 books long. But yeah, I definitely, as I indicated, want to make sure that I'm reading more queer literature. I like queer literature, it's just for some reason less on my radar. But yeah, it's definitely something that I want to be reading more of. But so yeah, with that, I'm going to round up this video and hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys for the next one. Bye!